So I originally envisaged that this video would be one long video on YouTube, basically talking about my experiences with the Sony A9, why I bought it in the first place. But when I did the first edit, it was coming up at about 40 minutes. So I suspect most people would probably look at the length and then not bother. So what I've decided to do is split it into 3 parts initially. As part of this series, I've then done a vlog with the Sony A9, and that's quite a few weeks ago now because I haven't actually got the camera at the moment, and more on that later. And so after the first 4 videos, I will then do some further videos to talk about why I haven't got the camera at the moment and what's next. So without further ado, I'll introduce you now to the first part of this series. We'll just talk about why I wanted a full frame camera in the first place, as well as some initial reservations with the camera I chose, and just a general rant on my disillusionment with Micro Four Thirds as it currently stands. So here we go. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you've watched my videos for a while now, you'll know that I predominantly shoot with Micro Four Thirds digital cameras. I've also dabbled a little bit over the years with Fujifilm, but that experiment really has come to an end for me at the moment. I've still got my XE1 and my 35mm f1.4, but predominantly I've just been shooting with my Micro Four Thirds cameras. However, I'm now considering a switch to the dark side, to full frame cameras, and even worse, to the Sony E-mount system of cameras and lenses. And if I wanted to be more specific, a Sony A9. It's cost me that much money, I still haven't really taken out of its bubble wrap. So here it is here, the Sony A9. Hasn't got a battery at present because I only received this a couple days ago. So I'm just waiting for the battery to charge up so I can update the firmware to the latest firmware and then set it up and then start using it. But anyway, here is my new camera. Let me just put it back in its bubble wrap. I'm not ready to use it just yet. It's hard to believe that that camera was released back in 2017. So as of today, it's about a 7-year-old camera, although because of the support it got from Sony, I don't really class it as a 7-year-old camera because it got firmware updates and substantial firmware updates all the way up until 2019. So it's only, to me, really a 3 to 4 year old camera, and some of its features probably still can't be beaten by a lot of modern mirrorless full frame cameras. So why, after years of service from my Micro Four Thirds cameras, did I decide to switch to full frame? And I say switch, I'm still keeping my EM1 Mark 1 because it is a nice lightweight setup. The 12 to 40 Pro lens is great, and it does still have some functions for me in photography. Like I've got a nice macro lens for it, it's got my flash gear when I do occasional flash. So I'm not switching, I'm just adding the Sony A9 into my collection. So I'm hoping with the A9 it'll help me meet some of my new needs as a photographer. So I'll talk about them in a little bit more detail in a minute, but I've got 3 distinct needs at the moment as to what I was looking for in a new camera, and I have agonized over what full frame camera to buy over the last few months. I've got the added advantage that because I haven't really had a full frame camera before, and I'm not really counting the experience with the Canon 5D Classic in that, because I've only really got a few cheapo lenses for that, and certainly not enough investment in a previous full frame camera system to steer me to a particular brand. So that is one thing which isn't really holding me back, trying one brand over another. So yeah, as I said, I've agonized over the last few months deciding what full frame camera to try. But as you've just seen, I've just bought the Sony A9 used a couple of days ago, and that camera has to be one of the most expensive things I've bought in my life, excluding houses and cars, but probably the single most expensive thing I've bought for a hobby. I think my most expensive purchase before that was probably my original EM1 Mark 1, which came with a 12 to 40 Pro lens. I think I paid about $650 for that. So then to spend nearly double that now just for the Sony A9, it's quite a big investment, and hence why I'm probably a little bit nervous at the moment to want to use it. At this stage, I do worry that I'm not going to gel with the Sony A9. I've been very reluctant, I think, to get a Sony. I think I would feel more connected with Nikon or a Canon or even the Panasonic full frame cameras. But so that was holding me back a little bit, because I do worry that I'm not going to gel with the Sony A9, but when I've done my extensive research, it is the camera that does seem to meet most of my needs at present. So what are those needs? Right, so my first need is the fact that I do like that full frame look. And by that, I mean that through my Canon 5D and the Sony A7S that I bought, I do find that I quite enjoy the look to its images. There seems to be a greater separation between the subject and the background. The images really have more three-dimensionality to them over my Micro Four Thirds cameras, which appear a little bit flatter in comparison. And I have considered getting some fast glass for the Micro Four Thirds system, like the f1.2 Pro lenses, but that still equates to about an aperture of 2.4 on a full frame camera. So it's a lot easier, I would say, to get a more full frame look with a full frame camera. And I would also like to try medium format at some stage. There are factors which are holding me back from that. One is the cost, and the other thing is the weight. To that end, I'm really hoping that trying a full frame camera first, and then maybe if I'm getting on with it, okay, buy a fast glass for that system, whether that will give me enough of that almost medium format look I like looking at in images in my full frame camera, so I can just hopefully stick to one system or one full frame system moving forward and forget about medium format for the time being. The second need is a better autofocus system. And I say better and an easier focus system, because don't get me wrong, you could probably capture great action images with any camera if you set it up right. So like you could set up, like let's use my dog as a case example. I like capturing images of my dog Billy running towards me, so I can easily set up a trap of putting like a twig or a log in the way so that she has to jump it, so then I can just focus on the object in her way, and then when she approaches it or jumps over it, that's when I would take my burst of images. Or equally, I could just try the spray and pray method that I've been using of late with my Micro Four Thirds cameras and getting some good results. But I just want a bit of an easier time with autofocus. I want the camera to concentrate on focusing the subject in the scene, so I have time to work on composition rather than just trying to get the subject in focus. So yeah, so that was my second need, better autofocus, whether that's better subject detection, tracking, and then hit rate for when I do take the shots. So the distinct third need in a new camera is lower noise. And I have been increasingly frustrated with the amount of noise in my images. I think even the sensor in the EM1 Mark II was worse than my EM1 Mark 1, and it's one of the reasons why I've now got rid of the EM1 Mark II. I just found that noise was bad at low ISO. Even in ISO 200 images, I was seeing noise in my images. And then when I was like shooting my dog running towards me, it is a little bit spooky down here, hence why I'm always looking around, because I've had sometimes some people visit the mill and come up behind me. So yeah, so anyway, so even though I've had some success at shooting ISO 6400 with my crop sensor cameras, the noise that introduces takes a long time to get rid of. And yes, you have got software tools now like DxO's Pure Raw and Lightroom's denoise functionality, but I do find that sometimes it can affect the way that an image looks, like it adds artifacts or it overly softens the image. So I think I'd rather try and get the image better in camera. And I think by having a camera without a crop sensor in it to capture more light and produce cleaner images is a requirement that I feel that I currently need in my photography. Right, so while not a distinct need, because I've always shot with Olympus cameras, I was really disappointed when Olympus pulled out of the camera business and it was picked up by OM Systems, who I've become a little bit disillusioned with. Yes, OM Systems have bowed a little bit to pressure and promised some of the OM1 users some improvements down the line, and I do feel that they should have concentrated more on making the OM1 camera the best camera it could be and update it as far as it could go to push the boundaries of what that camera was capable of before going to a Mark II version when hardware changes were needed. I just don't think the changes that they've introduced really are substantial enough to warrant a new body. So that's just my feeling. I just don't like the way the OM systems seem to be going at present, and they certainly seem to be concentrating on the bird in flight stroke wildlife photographers, albeit they've introduced that live ND function now for landscape photographers, which does look quite interesting, but I'm still not sure whether they could have just brought that to the OM1 as well, because all it is a software change, and I'm sure there was probably a lot of capacity in the OM1 to handle some of the updates that the OM1 Mark II has. So I'm not particularly impressed with the way the OM system are looking after their current user base at present. Following on from 4 really, and it's to do again with the direction of Micro Four Thirds. Like, I originally got into Micro Four Thirds because there wasn't any mirrorless full frame cameras back then. They were all still the old big heavy DSLRs. So Micro Four Thirds were offering something new in terms of good photography abilities, but in a smaller, lighter package. The Sony A9 that I've just bought is smaller than the OM1 Mark 1 and Mark 2 and the G9 and G9 II, as well as other mirrorless full-frame cameras like the Canon R6 and the Lumix S5 and S5 II. And this is even comparable in size to my original Olympus EM1 Mark 1. It's a little bit heavier and it feels a little bit more solid in the hand, but still it's amazing how much technology Sony has crammed into a relatively small body here. And obviously I'm just talking about the bodies here because the lenses are a slightly different story. But again, Olympus seems to be going away from that idea of smaller lenses for a compact system by basically rebadging the Sigma 200-600 and releasing it for the Olympus or Micro Four Thirds mounts. So in summary, I feel that Olympus system are eroding the main benefits of why you would stick with a crop sensor medium format camera unless you needed that extra reach for capturing birds and other wildlife. On the other hand, Fujifilm do seem to be at least cutting the size and weight of their cameras. The X-T5, for instance, was smaller than the X-T4. But after my experiences with the Fujifilm X-E1 and the X-H1, I'm just not a massive fan of the X-Trans sensor, and it's one of the reasons why I would actually consider a Fujifilm GFX medium format digital camera in the future, because it doesn't use the X-Trans sensor. It uses it uses the Bayer sensor technology, so you won't have those issues with the X-Trans sensor in its medium format line of digital medium format cameras. So like I said, don't get me wrong, there are benefits still to having a crop sensor camera, like from the likes of Olympus, Panasonic or Fujifilm, certainly in getting more reach with less focal length, like that Sigma lens that Olympus have just brought out. Even though it has a 200 to 600mm focal length on a full frame camera, that equates to a 400 to 1200 focal length on a crop sensor camera like Olympus or Panasonic. But I feel that maybe it's, but it's just not for me, because as I said, I'm not really a bird or a wildlife photographer. I've worked out that for shots of my dog running towards me, I only really need a focal length of about 135mm max, and as such I've bought the 85mm f1.8 Sony to be my first lens, because I think that will probably meet a lot of my needs for capturing my dog running towards me. Like I said, I still think the crop sensor cameras will appeal to a lot of people, and they still appeal to me. The lenses and the body that I have are very compact, and if I want to go and take a lightweight camera and lens somewhere, then I will, and it's good for that. And it's also good for my macro and flash accessories that I have for the Olympus EM1 Mark 1, as well as the ability to use those lenses on my infrared system with the Panasonic GX1, also a micro four thirds camera. So I'm certainly not going to be getting rid of any more Olympus or Panasonic gear. I think the only question mark I have at the moment is whether I hold on to the massive 50 to 200 4/3 lens, which I use adapted to my EM1 Mark 1. And whilst that's good for more static shots, I never really had a lot of success with it tracking subjects in terms of dogs. I tended to, with that lens, use it in the way that I mentioned before, where I focused on a point, and then when the subjects moved through that point, that was when I would use to burst and take some images, and they came out quite well. But hopefully with the A9, I can use the camera and the lens to actually track the subject and then just capture it when the decisive moment does happen. So yeah, I'm hoping the A9 is going to make my photography easier in, like I said, focusing on the subject and just allowing me to concentrate on composition more. Well, that's the theory anyway. So as I said, I'm only really shooting really up to 85mm, sometimes maybe 135, and very, very occasionally probably up to about 200mm. So the benefits of staying with micro four thirds are starting to be outweighed a little bit now in terms of what I need. Hence why I've opted to try the Sony A9. Right, so that's the end of this part. The next part will cover why I chose the Sony A9. So thanks for watching. Bye for now.